In the New York City public service system, the government is run by two unique but equally vital groups: the elected and appointed officials who design initiatives, and the employees tasked with implementing them. These are their stories. Dun dun! Okay, we're back for another episode of Civil Conversations. I hope you all have had a great month since we've last connected. A lot has happened, and we're actually not going to focus today so much on everything that's happening in the city, in the state, or in the federal government. We're going to pivot a little bit more to a more positive theme topic of this podcast, which is to elevate and showcase people who work in New York City government, the civil servants that this show has been named after. So if you may remember, back when this originally started, I had shared my story in the context as to why I started this podcast. And if you haven't heard past episodes, to give you a brief history, I had worked for New York City for about 15 years, and I'm a daughter of a wonderful father who worked in city government. And we have an interview with him to sort of hear about his experience, what led him to the sector, some of his experiences. And it's just kind of reflecting and thinking back on some of these like really special moments that we've had that inspired um, this this sort of like conversation for us to have, this platform to develop for people who work in city government. My dad was someone who worked in the sector for close to 30 years before he retired. But there was like a lot of just beauty and authenticity and just special moments that came from him having that experience. Maybe this will come up a little bit in our conversation, but my exposure to city government actually started through him. So my dad had driven for deputy mayors, and I used to go work with him and shadow and enter in parts orders when he worked for DGS, which is no longer an agency. I had just like these sort of like sprinkles of experiences that later turned into something that I wasn't originally envisioning for myself. Like I went to school and wanted to study government, and originally thought I was going to be a history teacher and a political science teacher, and I wound up changing and winding up working in city government after kind of developing a passion for seeing things that were happening in the city and wanting to maybe be part of a change. And so his experience sort of led to me having a bit of an interest in these like little experiences that he exposed me to. And it was an inspiration for me to develop this podcast. I had worked for the city until 2022. When the administrations changed over, I kind of left with like the great resignation with a bunch of other folks. But it's something that I've missed. There's a lot of colleagues that I have developed really close friendships with, people who I have learned from. And part of the goal of this podcast is to not sort of recede and kind of miss the opportunity to elevate the workforce that was kind of decimated over the past couple of years, but really to try and amplify the voices and the experiences for people who are sometimes perceived to be jaded, kind of unambitious workers, which we're seeing now play out in the federal, right? In the federal government of like all this waste. It's the bodies that work for these institutions, not the systems themselves. And really like lacking a connection to ask people who work in these sectors and in these agencies what their experiences are, what ideas they have for innovation and efficiencies and all these things. So we're seeing it pan out in the federal level. And it's some of what happened in the local level back in 2022 when we started this out in 2023, early 2023. Just sort of taking away from that experience. So again, one of the goals of this podcast is to talk about and talk with people who work in city government, to learn about their stories, to learn about what excites them about this work and what drives them to continue to do this work. And, to really just get you as an audience to, one, buy into this and be sort of animated and excited, and to learn a little bit more of like what happens behind the scenes. Like you see shows like Inside City Hall. I would say there's like Inside City Agencies, right? You're talking to people who are not the CEOs or, commissioners or executive directors of organizations. You're talking to the people who are doing the work every day and hearing directly from them about their experiences and things that they hope to see and believe can be possible, just given the experience that they have working within these institutions and these bureaucracies. They are, and doesn't have to be a negative word, but acknowledging it and trying to honor the creativity that can exist based on the experiences that people have. And so John is someone who's been on our show a few times, and you reminded me, John, last time that we don't just have to talk politics. That's serious business. And I appreciate that, because some of these when we talk about this, it actually can be quite draining and deflating. So I really appreciate you reminding me about that goal of this podcast, that, it's really easy to react to everything that's happening. There's always something, a couple times a day, I feel like there's something that comes up in my New York Times or my daily news that's like, oh my gosh, we have to talk about this, but everyone hears about it.
Turn
We don't have to
notifications off.
react. Yeah, turn the
Got to turn
notifications off. They've been draining. So no, thank you for reminding me in the last episode that we want to do more of that. Of course, we want to have conversations. We have a new election, have an election coming up with new candidates on the radar. We have a lot of like, sort of hot topics from the news. But again, we do want to sort of keep this front and center of interviewing colleagues and bringing in more to talk about these sort of hot topic city issues, but also to just hear from them and allow people to share their voice and their experience and their background and their passion and their insights. And so we're going to backtrack and like rewind and do that with you. So I appreciate you reminding me. And I was like, well, we have to have that conversation with you. So I appreciate you coming back on the show. And yeah,
Thank you
really
for the
excited to talk
opportunity.
about it. Of course, of
Don't know when
course.
the last time I talked about my whole professional
Yeah.
career at the New York City public school system. So it'll
Yeah.
be I had to dig into the archives for a few dates and titles, make sure I had them all right. So that
Yeah.
was a fun exercise.
But we're not doing a background check. There will be no verification.
I'm
If anyone's
passed. I'm
listening is
passed.
doing that,
No,
then
we're
like
good.
stop. Yes. But yes, it should be very lighthearted. And I'm so happy to have you here. So just to do a little plug about you and our experience working together. So another part of, I guess, my inspiration to start this is an experience working with you. I mean, we worked together for a period of time, and I just really we had that sort of like that shared experience, right? Growing up here in New York City, living in New York City, and working for New York City, right? Just all these shared experiences that come with, just the people who we are. It's just sort of like part of our existence, part of our beings. So certainly, I just want to give you props for that because all the times that we talked and like just really shared again like that sort of, I guess, I don't know how to describe it, but like sometimes frustrations, right? That we were young people with a lot of energy and sometimes ran into certain things. So we'll kind of talk about that. So definitely want to hear about your experience and we'll get into those questions. But I just wanted to say, like, part of this also came from like, wow, just continuing to have that friendship and that camaraderie and that trying to keep in touch and like how you've been doing and colleagues and peers and building out that support network and that ability again to amplify different voices really came from a lot of our like I call them like around the water cooler. That was, stuff that we used to do, like chat and catch up and reflect on things that were happening in the office and in the city. And so I also want to give you a bit of props for sort of inspiring this to be a project and something that's become a bit of like a passion of mine. So thank you for being
Of
part of my
course.
journey.
Well, thank you. No, that's it goes both ways. I always appreciated our time working together and our friendship, both while we worked together and now after, and keeping those topics, those conversations going, and also just building our friendship around those things. How many times though sitting around, did we have a water cooler? Maybe it was, I always envision it the cubicles. It was the
Yeah.
cubicles. It was, sitting on the radiator and kind of with some of our other colleagues, spilling the tea, as they say. And yeah, those are great memories. And it's funny, the farther they get away, the more I remember them and appreciate them.
Yeah.
So it's been nice to revisit a lot of that stuff with you.
Totally, totally. Like it's golden times for sure. So, I guess to start, I would love to hear just about you. Like, what was, your upbringing? Like, what was your experience growing up here in New York City? And, I asked this of, in our Talking the Beat series, like, was city government or working in government something that you had envisioned for yourself as you came up as a teenager, young adult, going to school and things like that? So just want to hear a bit about your story and like what led you to city government.
Sure. It's kind of in a roundabout way. When I was younger, I grew up in South Brooklyn. I had my heart set on becoming a professional athlete, as you know. I put everything I had into doing that. And my joke is always that I didn't make it to the professional leagues, but along that journey, so many great things happened. Met some incredible people, lived in some different places, some great places, and ultimately I wound up meeting my wife. So I'm always like, hey, that's better than any championship I'm gonna win or anything like that. So like, it all worked out that way. But that was it's again, it's something I think as you the further you get away from it, the more you look back on it and appreciate the journey. And a lot of
Mhm.
the times it's okay, you might not have reached the quote unquote goal that you originally set out, but just super thankful, for that time and that experience. It taught me a lot and kind of informs everything that I do today. Um, so the short answer, I didn't grow up thinking about being in civil service, but as I was in university, there were 2 summers where I did get jobs as an hourly employee. The first one was doing, the first one was funny. It was actually like a book buyback program.
Hmm.
We love to save stuff at New York City public school system, the filing, the record keeping. Oh, you can't throw that away. We don't dispose of that. So it was a program where we went to schools and scoped out, they had report cards, for example, from like the 70s where they're like, I don't know what to do with this stuff. You can't just
Wow.
throw it in the trash. So it was like almost like a recycling buyback program. That was one summer. And then the next summer, I worked as a procurement analyst out in the field, out in Staten Island. And that was a great experience as well. That was more, in the weeds with some of the day-to-day stuff that happens. And funny enough, it was with early childhood and
Hmm.
managing contracts and that stuff. I was just pushing paper, which I was more than happy to do. You kind of
Sure.
learning the system from the inside out. So those were 2 gigs that I worked at over the summer. And then when the time came, I had applied to grad school, and I got into grad school, and I was thinking I'm just gonna, power through this, do this. I think I'll take courses over the summer. Former boss who I had gotten to know throughout my various jobs at the DOE, and my sibling also works for New York City public school system. I had just built a small network through those 2 odd jobs, those jobs that I had as an hourly employee. She had reached out to me right before school was about to start and was like, "Hey, I have a position on my team. If you're interested to come and interview, here's the job description. Here's how you apply." So I was just like, "Yeah, let me go for it." And lo and behold, that started the journey to where I am now. I was a special projects coordinator back in October of
Nice.
2011, and
Wow.
that was in the division of portfolio planning. And that was really my first professional like experience. It was at Tweed, the main headquarters of the New York City public school system. Obviously, that was at a time where we were in the office 5 days a week.
Mhm.
I was single and living at home, so I had a ton of time on my hands. So I was like going in early, staying late, like running around. Just I used to take a lot of pride in calling myself a utility man. I'm like, whatever you need help with. Does anyone need help with anything? I could help you. I could do this.
Nice.
And again, that's how I continue to network and build my skill set, get to know who does what. You have all these formal policies and this is how we do things, but as you know, there's so much informal stuff that goes on in terms of relationships and institutional knowledge. And I was really able to plug into that. And I credit the team that I worked for, the boss that I had, who you know as well. A lot of people that offered to take me under their wing and show me, hey, do you want to learn how to use Galaxy? Do you want to learn how to use Famous? Do you want to look and similar to my athletic career, I'm just super appreciative of that. And I always try to pay it forward. And that's something that always informs how I operate today. So I was there for about 2 years. And then I took another job in school support. And that's where I say I like kind of went out on my own because I had this great team around me, lots of knowledge, experience, and this other opportunity came up. It was a little bit more money. It was something different. So my boss at the time, she encouraged me to take it. It was still at
Mhm.
Tweed. She's like, "Hey, it could be a good opportunity for you. You'll still be here." So I took that job and I was there for about 2 years. That was interesting because I worked with some incredible people there, 2 people that are more senior in the organization now that I still reach out to for questions and stuff like that. But that model with the how they supported schools. That was with the clusters and the networks. So not to get too down the rabbit hole, but the superintendents really weren't involved at that time. That was under Bloomberg. He had forced the superintendents, kind of put them on the sidelines, and had this cluster and network support system for schools. But when I got there, they started to phase that out and bring the superintendents back.
Mhm.
And that was fascinating. It was frustrating at times because we always heard a no,
Mhm.
which was just like, nope, you can't do this. Nope, you can't do that. And my boss, who was not that senior at the time, was pushing back on senior leadership, and he had the right to do it because they're just like, we're not, we're phasing this out. So that was fascinating to see, and that was I learned a lot there, but frustrating to just tell people no. As a employee, I think I don't want to speak for you, but I think we have the same mindset. We're just like, how do we help? How do we get this done? That was kind of the way I was taught in my previous role. Um, so that was interesting. And then, funny enough, I'm walking around Tweed and I bump into, she wasn't my boss at the time when I worked in portfolio planning, but a senior colleague. Um, Early childhood had just started blowing up.
Mhm.
I bump into her in the hallway and I'm like, how's it going in early childhood? I heard it's like crazy. And she's like, it is absolutely bananas. Are you looking for a job? I was like,
Ooh,
I
sounds
guess, I don't
appealing.
know. I said, what is the role? What is the role? She goes, honestly, I have no idea, but there's so much going on
Just need
and
people.
we need help. So I was
Mhm.
like, that sounds great. Sign me up. It was with some of my former colleagues who I had worked with. This person, again, she wasn't my manager on in the portfolio planning team, but she was a senior person there, just wonderful individual, had a ton of respect for her. Still keep in touch with her to this day. So I started on that journey. That would have been in 2015. Um, and that, and I, we wound up ending there in June of 2022. So I was there for 7 years. And that was, I mean, you were there for a good part of it, but I think that was such an incredible time to see the power of, when there was so much enthusiasm, support, resources behind an initiative, and we could just go. We could
And
just
a
get things
switch that didn't really default to the no, but like the
right,
yes, make it happen. It's like
right.
total different dynamic. Yeah.
Absolutely. And you know what? I used to laugh. I was like, and when I worked in school support, it was always a no. And I was like, oh, that's terrible. I hate telling people no. And then when I got to early childhood, we never told anyone no. And I'm like, this is really hard too. Like we have a lot of money and a lot of resources and a lot of support, and it's still really hard to get things done. But someone once told me, difficult things are difficult, and that's the way it's going to be. And if you want to do big things, like they're going to be challenging, and you just gotta roll with it. And I know this was your experience as well, but that was just an amazing time. And I think
Mhm.
not to repeat it, but the further away I get from that experience, and the 2 or 3 years removed I am still working in New York City public school system. I just have such an appreciation for what we were able to accomplish.
Yeah.
And, because it is really difficult to do things. I mean, I know economic times have changed, leadership has changed, things in the country have changed. I get all that, but to be able to do what we did, and I'm a parent, my daughter was in 3K, now she's in pre-K, to kind of to to do that and then live that experience and see it firsthand. It's amazing. It's
Yeah.
amazing. And I
Yeah.
always say it wasn't perfect. I'm not trying to. I hope everyone understands that. I'm not trying
Yeah.
to tell you it was all rainbows and unicorns. It certainly wasn't, but it was a challenging thing. The administration, the leadership took it on, head first. We dove right in,
Mhm.
and there was just so much, like I said, enthusiasm, support. I always joke, like, quite literally, blood, sweat, and tears were shed to stand that thing up, to put it together. Going through COVID together. I remember
Mhm.
that
That's
week.
right.
My wife was pregnant. It was a crazy time, and it kind of hurts the way that it ended there. But I always try to think back on all the good times that we have, and it's nice to see people talking about it again and making it a point that we need some type of early childhood, early education solution, permanent solution in the city, because it really is a pillar of everything that the city wants to do.
Yeah.
So it was really cool to work there. And then after that ended, I spent about a year in the central finance office. which was a little more straightforward. You know, I didn't need all that craziness as you know the way things ended in early childhood.
Yeah.
And that was an amazing office. That's an office that liaises with the OMB. You know, so they're kind of liaising between the New York City public school system, OMB. The money is flowing through that office. Some amazing people there who are
Mhm.
just incredibly tech savvy, know all the systems, could tell you a whole history about a funding stream and where it
Sure.
originated, where it is now, you know, what, how it started, what the number was, the cuts. Really fascinating. It was like looking into the finance archives for a lot of stuff. So worked with some incredible people there, but that was a short stint. And now I work in space management, where you know we're dealing this. The class size initiative is our big initiative.
Mhm.
Um, but it's cool. You know, you're in between school facilities, the SCA. Um, our main objective right now is class size law and how we can create capacity throughout the city for these schools that are underutilized, overutilized, don't have enough space. You know, we have, I think it's over like 1,600 buildings in the city. Some of them are like over 100 years old easily.
Yeah, I believe
Um,
it.
so I've been able to like put in a bunch of projects to create capacity, improve schools, and it's needed. I mean, you know, I think you worked in schools more than I did prior to our time in early childhood, but it is a working in the field and being in schools, you really see the front line. Like we have some beautiful buildings in the city, and then we have buildings that you're just like, why are we sending kids here?
Yeah.
This is absurd. So to be able to kind of chip away at that now is pretty cool. And again, it's a different lens into you know dealing with the capital budget, school construction authority, our finance people, DSF. So that has been a interesting ride. And again, it's I like out being out in the field supporting schools. A bit of a different vibe than the you know the central office. So
Absolutely. That's so cool.
that's my
I mean,
story. Yeah.
that's your story and I love it. There's so many like little like morsels that I kind of want to dig into there. And I'll just
Sure.
say like to that last point, just speaking from personal experience, I could sort of speak to why school facilities is so important. So my little one, I was in the position of a couple years ago transitioning him from early intervention to 3K and pre-K. And he has special needs and was getting services. And they had sent me, being like the central, I guess at the time was CPSE, the Center for Preschool Special
PSE,
Education? Yes.
Committee on
So
Special
C
Education.
committee, sorry, Committee for Preschool Special Education, the
Okay.
CPSE first, and then you go to
CPSC. Okay.
CSE. So thank you guys, committee. Um, they had sent me to a space close to my home, but it was a renovated, I don't know what building. I think it was not a school. Actually, it was a school. It was a Catholic school, but an older building to your point, right? So look, they took this over, and they were running programming for tons of little kids, and I went to go see it. It was a dark brown upon brown upon brown building with lots of stairs, right? So you're talking like cement beige walls, um, brown tiles, brown wood, brown beigey roll up shades, right? In a brown brick building. And I'm like, of course, coming from, being around programs. I'm like, this does not seem like a conducive space to educate small children. But even as an adult, I probably wouldn't want to work in there. It gave me
Hmm.
sort of like Captain Underpants vibes of like, people only want, if you've never seen Captain Underpants, like a principal, he only wants people to kind of like live in misery and everything is like dark and gloomy or whatever. That's sort of, not to knock it, but, people do with what they can. But I was just like, wow, it really kind of, that's not the space or the program my son ultimately went to, but I knew like he could not climb up and down stairs. But if you're a parent who maybe may not speak the language, a parent who may not know to advocate and say, this may not be the ideal space for my child, you might be kind of there. And those experiences, like imagine starting your education experience in as best they can, right? Like they did really well. There was toys within this space, but just the space itself did not feel like a space for young children in comparison to many other of like the vibrant spaces we've seen. And that's what you start in. Versus when I think kids who start in a very vibrant space and then kind of go over the years into these brown boring buildings, you kind of start with that high, and then you're like, oh, this is what school is. And it kind of like space has such an impact. Like if you think about your home and you craft your home and you design your home to feel homey and welcoming and whatever kind of vibe you're going for, sometimes schools don't have that option because they're just having to make do with what they have. And it really is so important. Like McDonald's, they had color, like orange and red to get you to feel like you need to eat and get out, like color, and has such an impact on people. So I just wanted to kind of elevate that point that
No doubt.
it's going to be interesting to see what they do and just how important an accessible space, especially if you have people with special needs and restrictions, and a welcoming and a conducive space for learning, like how crucial that is. So thank you for
Yeah, of
doing that work now.
course.
And I'm sure you're like a really reasonable advocate. So I'm excited that you're doing that now.
And I'm glad you mentioned accessibility because that is really intertwined with everything that we're doing. When we have an opportunity to upgrade a space or create capacity, accessibility is always incorporated there because
Yeah.
so many of our buildings are not accessible,
Right.
don't have wheelchair access. The doors are not wide enough in the bathroom. They don't have a handicap stall. So
Hmm.
it's a fascinating lens. We're
Yeah.
chipping away, but I always say like there's no excuse for all of our buildings. We have $110 billion budget. God only know. I don't even know what the capital budget is. Like
Yeah.
that's something that we should just change, and we're
Yeah.
working on it. Not fast enough, but it's something
Yeah.
that is front and center. It's
Yeah.
been interesting
Totally.
to see.
Totally. Well, one thing I had mentioned, I think I was at a meeting, in a couple meetings, but it was like leveraging office space. Like we have so many, you hear all the time right now with this return to office kind of being uh sort of delayed process, or some, companies just completely letting go of their leases. We talked about this of space, needs for training for space. I was like, why can't we have just like high schoolers be in these cool office buildings, right? And then you can use the buildings that we have for like middle school, elementary school. You could renovate them, redesign them, etc. But I mentioned that in a couple meetings. People think I'm crazy, but these are the kinds of things that we could talk about. And it's like,
Have to
hey,
think
why not,
outside of the
right?
box.
You have to think outside
100%.
of the box. Yeah. So we'll
100%.
see. So something else I wanted to talk about to you is sort of like your experience, and one that I think is super important, which is having mentorship, having support, and in a sense, sort of having mobility. So I think one of the challenges working in civil service is that if you were to stick very strictly with the process, you take an exam, you're appointed to a position in that exam, and you can only sort of level up if you take exams, wait years for that to happen, and get pulled off the list to get put into positions, right? So that can be a very slow process, and one that maybe may not align, right, with sort of career mobility, um, and advancement. So you sort of spoke about your experience of having mentors and people who encouraged you, like took you under their wing to expose you to different experiences, but also like to kind of let you know, hey, these are these positions that are opening up, and what are you looking for? Are you interested? And so I kind of wanted you to talk about like how important do you think mobility has been in your career, like to sort of have that flexibility to change your position in the time that you spent in city government. Like what reflections do you have on that? And then also equally, do you think that you would have survived or worked as long in city government if you didn't have those opportunities to move into different roles?
Great questions. To your first one, I think was, I think when I started and where I am now, it was this really nice time in the sense where when I first started, not everyone was permanent. You could hire, and HR is still somewhat of a hazy mystery to me, but I remember that you could hire people provisionally. There
Hmm.
was a long time where people could be, hired into roles that they did not take a test for. That it's provisionally in the sense we're going to hire you, but when this test comes out, if you don't take it, you're going to get bumped. But there was a long period of time when I first started where that was not the case, where people could move around provisionally, and it created a lot of really great opportunities for me and for other people.
Yeah,
It didn't
absolutely.
have to be, hey, did you take this test that only comes out every 4 years? Like, no, I didn't take the test. I will, but you're talking 4, 5, 6 years down the road. So that was like a sweet spot in terms of that. And also, we had people, good HR people, that as they were shifting to moving away from hiring provisionally, making people permanent, you have to be on the list. and I wasn't the only one. People were well informed about it, but hey,
Mhm.
make sure you sign, like you're in this title. You need to sign up for this test. This is when it's coming out. I was really lucky in that way. So I don't know if that didn't happen, who knows where I would be, but I know people were, it was, that to your question about mobility, uh, it did allow people to move around a little bit more. And again, it was different economic times,
Yep.
budget, budget constraints, hiring freezes, this, that, and the other thing. Maybe I was just naive or ignorant when I first started, but it didn't seem like any of those things were an issue. And now
Mhm.
everything seems to be a bit of a slog.
Yeah.
Um, even hiring people from the outside, like you need that mix. You need that mix of people that have been around forever, that know the systems inside and out, and then people that are coming in with different experiences, whether it's from other city agencies or the private sector. And I think we really have not been able to do that.
Mhm.
And it kind of creates this stagnation where people are just like, I'm in this job, not having mobility or not seeing a light at the end of the tunnel. And I'm not talking about retirement. That is not a light at the end
Mhm.
of the tunnel, but like
Yeah.
new challenges, new opportunities, new teams, new initiatives. If you don't allow people to at least have that option, we've
Right.
seen it. It creates this
Yeah.
kind of whatever it's jadedness, or
Yep.
this lack of, it's not lack of ambition. It's just kind of, you feel a
Stuck.
little, yeah,
You're
stuck,
stuck.
right? Yeah, yeah, you feel that.
And yeah, and to your point, and it's a wonderful, like, I had totally forgotten about that phase of like sort of joining and how things have changed. But even, more recently, it's to have that balance of people who have institutional knowledge and to bring in fresh energy, fresh perspectives, but just to have bodies. Like, I think the latest slog is like everything needs to get vetted and approved. And I've heard people who are looking to take on new positions, and it'll take them like actively talking to a hiring manager. It took someone recently a year to get to actually move. And like, think about that, just what level of investment are you going to have where you are? What kind of sort of draw and energy does that have on a position you're shifting to? Like, it's just like a really long time to be in limbo. And like you said, like, kind of like when you zoom out, you might look back on it and be like, it's okay that that took a year, but in the moment, especially if you're really looking to do something new, um, that shit can be destructive, right? And so I think it's interesting to see sort of like the new, it's unfortunate actually, it's not interesting, it's unfortunate to see that like when we were kind of, I think, given the false sense that like there'd be a lot of innovation and trying to chip away at bureaucracy in this last administration, there's just been additional layers added of like hiring freezes. OMB needs to review every position, not even like certain positions at certain thresholds. And so things have just taken a long time to get through. And that has limited people's options to move into different positions. And I think, it's one thing to be part of the sector. Like, I personally myself did not think that I had to leave city government. I was like, okay, maybe I might want to like dip my feet into working in different agencies, working for different offices, because I'm the kind of person that I do need something new every once in a while, right? Like, just to keep me stimulated, right? And connected and excited. I've been in offices and stayed for from several years, but sometimes you do need a change. Or if you need to, move on because sometimes your office may not be able to offer you opportunities to advance. Sometimes you have to leave, right, in order to level up and move up in your career. And so not having that mobility, I do think, um or allowing people to tap into their skill sets, like that's one of my things. And I made a note here that we have to have a conversation about that, like the civil service process, the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? I think it's meant to sort of do away with nepotism. I saw your eyes get big. It's meant to do is meant to do away with nepotism. But if you're smart, you know how to get people in to work for you, or there's special titles. So it happens all the time, right? With administrations, you see a special advisor that only requires a high school education, making 190,000. Like, that's not an open call. That's not an open search. That's specifically right geared for someone. I saw that recently under this latest administration. So there are ways to finagle, right, to get people in if you really wanted to. And so then what that means is if you don't have political connections or that network, you might be stuck where you are. And I do think that that leads to some of the jadedness, like you said, right, that we've talked about, and some of that like lackluster in the fact that like you've kind of been stuck doing the same thing that you can be good at, but maybe you're destined to do more and capable to do more. And sometimes the civil service system like really keeps you sort of stifled and um I'm trying to think of the right word, just immobile
Yeah.
and um small sometimes. Like I
Hmm.
use that
Hmm.
word more recently. Like it keeps you in a place that keeps the cogs and the machine running. But we are more than cogs, right? And there are a lot of people who have a lot of passion and insight and potential to do
Yeah.
more if they choose to. Like if you want to do one job forever, there's nothing wrong with that. And we have some people who I've had people who I've seen that they stayed in roles for their whole careers until retirement and they are uber professionals, you know, that sort of like I show up at the same time, I take my strict 1 hour lunch, doing their work and getting things done. And there's nothing wrong with
There's a
that.
place for that too. Absolutely.
Absolutely. Like
Yeah.
everybody has their own ambitions and their own rationale for why they work, right? Like sometimes work is just work. That's okay too. And benefits and pension is okay too. But if you're doing a good job, you're showing up and doing great things, and that's fine, right? Like we all have our piece to the puzzle. But sometimes it can be a little challenging to move to tap into, sort of new skill sets that you learned or you're curious about because the civil service system can be inflexible. And so I kind of wanted to elevate that as a topic and we can continue to talk about it. But like mobility really can be important to keep people stimulated. And there are opportunities for us to, rethink civil service to make sure people are staying engaged
Yep.
in their work for the long haul, right?
And I'm just saying this, I mean, I definitely don't want to go down the civil service black hole. My God, it's like it just needs to be
Yes. Keep
simplified. That's my short
yeah,
answer there.
yeah.
But as you're talking, I'm thinking, you talk about mobility and people that supported me along the way. That is really the main factor. I had good managers, I had good teammates
Mhm.
such as yourself, right? Like, I had people that were looking out for me and saw potential in me and knew the system to say like, hey, this could be a good next step for you. Or, I mean, I always say I'm grateful for my time in early childhood. Had the same manager there for a good period of time, and he looked out for me, right,
Mhm.
and others on the team and other people in the
Absolutely.
division to say like, hey, here's a way that you could level up, whether it's in the division or outside. And I think it just goes back to people,
Yep.
right? When you have good managers are managing their people and looking out for their people, coaching their people, helping their people. I always say that about you too. I was charged with managing a team, and I didn't have this like 20 years of management experience to draw on. I took a lot of pride in the sense that we did it together as a group, and we had a lot of great people on the team. And I think you just with everything that happened, COVID and people leaving and the way things are now, I think we've lost a lot of that, and people
Mhm.
are not empowered to, or they don't have the resources, to manage in that way to kind of say like, hey, this is what the next 1, 2 to 5 years could look like for you here in this division or within the department. It's just kind of people are just like you said, staying small, doing their thing. I'm just going to do this, but it really comes down to like management and people. And we were super fortunate, to have people um, that supported us along the way that were looking out
Yeah.
for us. Super
Yeah.
grateful for those people.
Yeah. And I think, those types of, and I say this all the time about just being out in the world, right? But your actions, your behaviors, your presence, your leadership, your actions are all contagious, right? So I feel like when you work in a space that is dynamic and supportive in that way, right? You have like any workplace, it doesn't have to be in city government, but any workplace, if you have a manager or a leader that invests in your development and treats you like a human. Like that's one thing I'll also say about our team, which I've really appreciated, was this sort of like dynamic of understanding that like work was work, but we're humans. So when we're not feeling well, when we have things with our families, like that we kind of were able to achieve that balance and keep that like morale really high. But if you're in a space where your manager is like, you're here from 9 to 5, you should be here Monday through Friday, which we did. But I mean, in that sense of like rigidness and your next step is to take this exam and be a level 2 person, not have you think outside of the box and like really think about your career progression beyond like this sort of like rigidity of civil service. That's contagious, right? You're going to be kind of like more of a worker bee if that's the environment that you're working in because you think that that's what's possible based on the leadership and the guidance guidance you're being given. Versus if you work for a team that is a little bit more encouraging and like gets you exposed to professional development opportunities, is telling you to take exams, is telling you to, look out for different opportunities, is extending you to opportunities, that is contagious, right? So then it does sort of pay forward. So you spoke to like previous managers and leaders doing that for you. You did it for the others. I've done it for others. And I've seen sort of like that sort of energy be contagious. To your point now, the environment is not like that, right? It's not conducive for that type of um development, I'd say. And also, yeah, like you can't say, I want to craft this position for someone because you don't have headcount, you don't have the authority. It needs to get vetted, it needs to do this, you need to do that. So it's like beyond civil service. It's just maybe, not less of a willingness and openness to sort of operate in that way, but just how important that is that you can kind of create that generational, right? Or like
Hmm.
maybe not generations, but like, yeah, I'd say so, right? Like just as your leaders and have new people coming in, new eras, you can sort of, create that kind of environment. And it is kind of sad to see how these transitions can have that kind of effect to like take something that had such momentum. And I'll speak to this just in my experience, to your point of like how the environment was before. It's like beyond civil service, but we had departments that like we had a chief experience officer who was trying to get people excited about working for our agency and doing recognition events and acknowledgement for people. That no longer is a thing. At the time, we had a whole team, part of central HR, that was doing development programs for staff. So you had management programs, mentoring programs, you name it, like teaching people how to, do certain skills, conflict resolution. Like they would create all these different programs to in house give people additional skills, not necessarily even just for, career progression, but just to be a better employee because you run into things every day and you need support and management and coaching to know how to navigate things well. That team is gone. And so, it just speaks to like, organizationally, the choices that are made and then the outcomes you get, right? So I feel like despite all the things people may have felt about de Blasio, it was a huge investment in that kind of energy, right? To create that kind of dynamic, exciting environment. And then we've kind of back to the like get into the basement with your stapler kind of mindset. Like you're a civil servant, you have a job, do your job, and be happy with it. And kind of like that investment, unfortunately, has been lost. So again, inside city agencies, that's
Yeah. I
the
mean,
unintended side effect. And then the services you offer people, right? It's all affected. So it's really is a shame.
I mean, you said it. I think about how much the culture changed, where we worked when when the leadership changed, right? That's their leaders, their managers, they're responsible for people's well-being, their professional career. And as that changed, it was upside down. I felt
Yeah.
that, right?
Yeah.
That was a really, really tough time for me and a lot of other people professionally.
Right.
And
It's
that's
like
like
the
putting it
culture
that's putting it
changing.
nicely. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like a
Yeah, you
huge
felt that.
culture shift, and it's like, I guess like changing medications. It's like, "Oh, they had me on, we had aromatherapy and it was like lemon and oranges to like make us excited." And then all of a sudden it's like you have no pills, your aromatherapy is taken away. We're taking away your acupuncture. Anything that was like intended to, promote wellness is just gone and let your body
Hmm.
figure it
Hmm.
out. It's like just like a very sort of
Yeah.
shock to the system,
Yeah.
in a way.
And I
Uh,
just want to mention another point about like talent and development. I know you were always big on that. You have a great knack for that. I always used to say too that the best players don't make the best coaches. I was a product of that too. I felt like
mhm.
I was good at the jobs I was doing. I got put in a management position with not a ton of management experience, and I'm grateful for people like you, the other people on our team, that I felt like we really did it together. And I always appreciated them giving me the grace to kind of stick with it as I was
Yeah,
learning on the fly. But you multiply that out by hundreds of employees and managers that are not getting that necessary development, coaching. It's a skill. Management is a
right,
skill. You could always
right.
practice it, you could get better at it. And we are not doing those things anymore. And these people are responsible. If you're a manager, even of one person, you have that person's professional career. You're responsible for that. You could have such a big influence, positive or negative, on their experience at
Absolutely.
work. It's a big responsibility, and we need to be doing more and investing in that.
Absolutely. And to that point, it's also, and I'll sort of make a note of this for us to revisit it when we chat about civil service, but it's also assuming that if you take an exam, because there's like something like an administrative manager exam, that because you take that exam, you could be a good manager, and that if you take that role, you should always stay in that role. Maybe not, right? So it's like certain things you can quantify, certain things, you can, I guess, estimate from exams, but it's also you may have a lot of people in roles that they shouldn't be in and then kind of stay and lead these teams into um not the best of spaces. But civil
It's a
service, they
broken
have the
system.
title, they have this,
It's
yeah,
a
so let's
this
keep
that's
it.
putting a it's a broken system that needs to
Yeah,
be revisited if they want to get serious about the
absolutely.
talent management within the city
Yes,
workforce. And there's a ton of
absolutely.
talent, ton of professional potential rather there.
Yep,
It's almost what 300,000 people. Yeah,
yep.
we need to be doing better by those
I
people.
love it. I love it. So, sort of speaking to this, and we kind of talked about this, I guess, from a staffing perspective, but you're a city kid, you grew up here, you've worked for city government, and now you're a parent. So, like, what are some of the things that you wish were better or done differently based on that experience? Like, we have seen a lot that there are things that are practical. You're like, wow, this seems so simple, but we can't do it because X, Y, and Z. To your point of like the no, right? I want to ask for these books. I want to ask for this, renovation because I want to convert this classroom, or I want to implement this program, or I want to do these changes. And very often the lean tends to be no because, for whatever reasons, it's harder to get clearance, the bureaucracy, the systems. So, what are some things that you found that really are feasible, practical, that maybe just get stuck because of that sort of like inclination to say no, or the bureaucracy or the systems, or that you just wish were better because we know from our experience that they can be? It's just people, sometimes it's like it's kind of it might make people work a little harder or ask different questions, and it's just like things get stuck. So, what are some things that you wish were better just based on your experience?
Well, I'll go with one new one and one old one. The new one, a little recency bias here, but it is so expensive to build things in this city and in this
Hmm.
country. And I think we could connect that to very like housing, right? When we talk about the lack of housing, it's so expensive to build. And I am no expert in it. I have no idea why things are so expensive. I have you know, some kind of general thoughts like we pay people good wages. We have, I'm pro union, but we have unions involved. But you're building out rooms for schools. We're trying to generate capacity. It's astonishing
Hmm.
how expensive things are. And that translates to everything in the city, right? Again, whether you're trying to build housing, whether you're trying to repair a subway track or whatever it is, build a park, renovate a, it's, it boggles my mind how expensive everything is when it comes to that. And I think if there was a way to, I don't know if it's lower the cost or just make it more, I don't even know, more feasible. Um, it's astonishing, and things just take very long to build because
Yeah, I
of
was
the
gonna say.
bureaucracy, all of
Yeah,
the
it's the
loopholes.
cost, and the project takes forever. Like, you see a playground that the stuff is sitting there for like 3 years.
And
It
again, I'm
takes a
no
long
expert
time.
in it, but I know simply like things shouldn't be so expensive and they shouldn't take so long. And I think
Mhm.
that's part of the battle because hey, we're gonna generate capacity for this school. Well, if it's gonna take 2 years, 2 years is a long time, right? Like we might not need it in 2 years. Maybe things
Right.
change, so you're not able to keep up. Um, I think the other thing, which we've spoken about a lot of the times, is just the contracting and procurement mechanisms that we use in
Mhm.
city government. They are old, they are outdated, they are antiquated. They do not allow you to do things in a effective and efficient manner. And contracts taking even 18 months is just way too long.
Mhm.
The payment system, people not getting paid on time, not being able to track down payments, that's just like operations 101. You have to pay your bills. You got to pay them on time. And how much time did we spend trying to track down budgets, contracts, procurement? Those are things that just, if those efficiencies were built in, those systems were better, more up to date, more user friendly, we'd be so much more productive. I
Yeah.
also think you wouldn't have to train people as much. I remember, getting trained and training people, you're not really teaching them the system. You're teaching them the glitches of the system. It's like, oh, if this thing happens, this is what you have to do. And that's not really like, that shouldn't be part of the process.
Yeah.
And that always bothered me. It's like everyone used to talk about the budget, the budget. It's like at that time we had more than enough money. I'm like, the budget is really not the problem. It's just that items that we want are not contracted. a contract is going to take way too long to put into place. Um, so things like that. I mean, we're operations people, so that's my bias. But I think that's an old one that I always think back to, where it's just like, uh, yeah, the technology behind it is just not good. Our systems
Yeah.
behind that are just not that good, and it's not the flashy thing. Like if you had a
Right.
if you well, I think our council member, he's running for comptroller, and he's talking about paying nonprofits on time. It's not as appealing if you say, I want to update the procurement system that the city
Right.
uses. I don't think people are going to be like, oh, I'm voting for this person. I want to get rid of FMS. Okay, well,
Yeah.
but I think those are the ideas that you have to think about as an
Yeah.
operations person or as a technology person in a senior leadership position, because they're brutal. And they've
Yeah.
gotten better. I'm not, they've gotten better from when I started. I'm sure, from when you started as well. Like we always used to joke, we had a colleague who'd be like, we used to have to ship these changes up to Albany once a month to make budget. So it's like it has gotten better. I don't want to say it hasn't, but
Right.
it needs to move a little
Right.
quicker, I think.
And to your point, like I think part of like taking that to the next level, and I feel like we could have conversations about specific things and like just keep going like into a hole and you can ask like, but why? But why? But why? But why? Right. And it could take you down this path. And I don't know if people ask those questions. Like if we're talking about provider payments as an example, the question is why. But there's also certain teams that don't talk to each other, branches of government that don't talk to each other, that don't know each other's like, sort of steps in the process, right? That adds layers to that complexity. So like I had actually talked to someone about this recently, and it's an excellent point about the operations and understanding like the order of operations and who has different sort of steps in the process and ownership of why things may be getting stuck, right? So it's like super complicated, but you're also not only in this like talking about those systems, but like when is that money made available? When is money actually released? When, you can't do contracts without having the budget. And then there's like, all these things. And it's like, okay, there's money out there. We know the coffers are open. So there's like a lot of, I think, yes, we want to talk about those things, but are those people, the comptrollers, the city council members, the agency leads, are they having these conversations? Probably not, right? And so that's one thing that I always like sort of walk away with of like operations isn't sexy, but you really should be having people who have that mindset of like being operations, get it done type folks in some of these roles. And it's not that politics and politicians, like I don't want to kind of turn it in that way, but it's like, yes, you can talk about the shiny object and the shiny thing that you can say check to, but there's a lot of the work behind the scenes that we can do to make these systems and these collaborations between agencies, between systems, between processes to work better. That doesn't happen because we don't have that kind of partnership and real operations lean here in New York City. It's, yeah, like more people driven. Like, this is what I did versus the why we're doing
Right.
something. And so that's definitely something I want us to talk about a little bit more in another episode.
And to your point, I think of so many great moments in early childhood where they're like, we have this problem. Let's get all of the people that know their field into a room or on an
Right.
email, and let's figure it out. And I think that is like that could be like an example for maybe what you're referring to about, agencies not talking to each other, or there's no type of, you have the policy, but how are we going to operationalize that? And I used to
Right.
love when, I mean, it was scary and frustrating at times, but it's like, hey, we're going to do 3K. Let's get everyone together and figure out how we're going to do this and what that's going to mean for headcount and budget and
Right. Right.
NICEX. And again, like looking back on that time might have been crazy while we were doing it, but that's kind of that mindset that you need to say, like, let's just get everyone in the room together.
Yeah.
You're the ops person, you're the instructional person, you're this person. Like, how are we going to do this? Tell me from your point of view how we're going to do it. And we had the leadership at that time to put it all together. And it was
Right.
it's pretty cool to see.
Yeah. Absolutely. Love it. So, any other, and I think we could probably continue this conversation. There's lots of like little gems that came out of this, but
Yeah.
is there anything else you'd want to share just on your experience, sort of closing thoughts? Something you
No,
wanna talk about again later? We could sort of, like, put a pin in for the next time?
no, I mean, I love how you always highlight like the city worker and treating us, yourself, like with this sense of dignity. Because a lot, I mean, it's pardon my French here, but a lot of times we get shit on. It's
Mhm.
city workforce. When I try to explain to people that how big the city workforce is, it's like, of course you're going to have people that don't care what they're doing. Like you have that in literally every
Anywhere.
single organization.
Mhm.
And to see what's happening now in the federal government and some people cheering about that, I'm like,
Horrible.
hey, I got a story to tell you about my little experience working on a really exciting initiative and when leadership changes over and what that means. Like, people's lives are affected by that.
Mhm.
And by the way, the good thing that we were doing is also impacted by that. And now we're trying to, again, you hear mayoral candidates talk about universal childcare, and I just shake my head. I'm like, we had it,
Mhm.
and you let it
Mhm.
slip away. You created all these problems for it, and now you're patting yourself on the back for fixing the problems that you created. I'm just like, government can sometimes be the problem, but it is not the problem,
Right.
right? You can't have just one, you can't just have everything government, no private sector, everything private sector, no government. Like it or not, the government
Mhm.
plays an intricate role in our city, our state, and our country. Are there ways to make it better? I think if anyone told you no, they'd be lying to you.
Right.
But let's pause for a moment and treat these people with a little bit of dignity and respect, because as you know, not just in early childhood, we worked alongside some incredible people. I still do,
Yeah.
right? That are super dedicated, that are from the city, are not from the city, have a passion for education, have no education background. Like it brings together so many different people. It's really a nice snapshot of New York, and
Yeah.
that's a cool thing to see. And I think it's always nice to shine a positive light on, especially in these times when people are, I think a little misinformed. I'll say.
Right. Right. And 1,000% agree. I mean, I think part of this, and I think our shared experience is, you can't just always look and point the finger at people. You have to look at the organizations, you have to look at the structures, at the cultures, the things that support those people to be their best, to do their best. If you're upset that something's taking a long time, it is a good sort of like, what do you call that? Like a good sort of like news clip and sound bite to say, oh, this process is taking so long, but let's ask the question why, and don't assume that it's just a bunch of jaded people that aren't working. Do you understand their course, their workloads? Do you understand the systems that they're working in? Do you understand the like obstacles? Do you understand the legislation that, like I could say me going through the special education process, I have to deal with so many evaluations at the city level, state level, and then someone tells you one thing, then you get told something else. Like how many people, if you're processing, food stamps for someone, I remember that was something that come up of like people's services being taken away or taking forever to get processed. If you don't know that it's like a city process and a federal process and like so many different stakeholders that are involved, and you ask yourself why, at the end of the day, this is something, to your point, government is needed. These are services that are needed by someone that affects their day to day. But then you have these just like red tape layers of bureaucracy that sometimes are layered in. And it's not to say that those individuals are shitty people with no work ethic. Are you stopping to ask what are all the steps that they're doing? What are the things that are getting stuck? Why are things getting stuck? I think there's a lot that could be learned there for us at the state level and certainly right now at the federal level. Like, don't just assume it's the people. Really think about the legislation, the systems, the organizations. And, to your point about costs earlier, I also have my sense of like what happens in some of these contracting processes. So, how much money is invested in certain federal contracts that maybe they're not looking at? And it's just like, let's fire people. But guess what? When government comes in, and talk about government, if you don't have a job, who helps you? The government does. If you don't have food on your table and you need temporary support, who helps you? The government does, right? So it's
Yeah.
like kind of like creating this vortex of kind of bringing people back to like a point, but without dignity, right? I had a job and I was doing something and I was contributing, but then you're going to bring me to the space of like taking away my dignity to get essential things that I need as a human being, and that's really gross. But definitely want to
And,
talk about that.
and to the point of like employees that are going through this, so we went through it, let's say, what was it, 3 years ago, 4 years ago almost. We still have not come back from that,
Right.
right? I look at you and think about all the great people that we worked with that left. Those people most likely are not coming back, and if they do want to come back, the um, the finances, the appetite to bring more people in is just not there.
Hmm.
So we had I don't think people understand like the serious brain drain that happened in city government, and that happened 3 or 4 years ago. We still have not come back from that. Who knows if
Right.
we will ever return to that? And that seems to be happening at the federal level too. And you cannot underscore, it's not just 10 people, oh, those are 10 people that knew what they were doing, knew the
Right.
systems, knew the formal, the informal, experts in their field. And those people are not going to come back. And what kind of taste do you think it leaves in people's mouths that are still there? You
Right.
think they're going to want to go? I remember that feeling. You're seeing people being treated a certain way. You're like, I'm just going to keep my head down and not say anything and just kind of keep things moving. I wasn't like, hey, let me go above and beyond, or right? It creates that environment, and that is
Well, it makes
healthy
me
right
think of those recent emails of like, send back the 5 things you accomplished this week. I was like,
there.
talk about micromanagement to
I
the
was having
umpteenth fucking level, man. I was
PTSD,
like, what?
PTSD. I'm just like,
Oh, horrible,
again, I have
horrible.
a story to tell you. If people, I see people cheering like, yeah, get rid of it. And again, I don't think anyone would say, is it the most efficient? No, but it creates that safety net for people that might be
Absolutely.
going through hard times, might not be able to do this or this, that, or the other. Like that is government's responsibility, and to gut certain institutions for, I don't know, no good reason. It
Yeah.
seems like I said, you and I have lived through that, and it definitely had a long lasting negative effect and still does have a
Right.
negative effect there.
Right.
So,
Well, beautiful insights, and I'm
yes,
hopeful that we have opportunities to get people into, positions of power and influence that aren't, just the sound, but the soul, right? To kind of make some of these changes. And so I just want to say thank you for all that you do and continue to do, and for sort of like sticking, hanging in there and putting up a good fight. And grateful for you to always be part of this venture with me. And, certainly more. Again, I made like so many notes, so we'll definitely have more follow-ups to this to talk about, civil service and mobility and
I think you have to
innovation.
be
And
you have to be the next guest on your podcast. I think I'll interview you.
yes, I'll find like some voice changing. Okay, we could do that. Let's say I'll find voice changing. Be like, Liz, what did you think about this? Oh, well, I thought about that X, Y, and Z. Yes, but I appreciate that. So thank you again for being on.
You too. Thank you.
Certainly welcome others to, if you have a story, some reactions to this, you want to kind of like take apart and dissect and talk a little bit more about a particular topic that we spoke about today, to please reach out, let me know, let us know. Certainly took some notes here on things that we can reflect on, with some new guests that are going to be joining and kind of coming into the fold over the next few episodes with John and I. So thank you so much for sharing a bit about your story and your experience. Happy to have you still,
You too.
serving our public schools and our students with your unique flair and your unique energy, and appreciate you and all the others that maybe are not being acknowledged in this moment. And I hope you all hang in there, and fingers crossed there'll be better times to come. So
Appreciate
that's all
that.
we have. Of course, that's all we have for this time, but looking forward to seeing you all back for our next episode, and have a great rest of your day.